Good afternoon, and welcome back to Creating Energy, the Northern Resources Conference. We're excited to have you here, and we're excited for all the speakers that have come before and what's coming up next. We'll be looking at our Panel 2 session, Canadian Product BC. If you have some questions during this session that you'd like to post, please put them off to the right on the Q&A panel, and we'll try and get to those questions a bit later. And now I would like to introduce Brad Herald. Brad is the VP Western of Operations for Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Brad?
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the resource developments I'll be speaking about today are located within the traditional territories of the Treaty 8 and Denishaw peoples. It's my pleasure to represent the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CAP. CAP is the voice of Canada's upstream oil and natural gas industry. We enable the responsible growth of our industry and advocate for economic competitiveness and safe, environmentally and socially responsible performance. Let me begin for a moment by talking about global energy demand and the role of Canada's energy, specifically our LNG, can play on the world stage. Global demand for oil and natural gas grew for 20 years prior to the pandemic. As economies reopen, global demand is expected to revive, and long-term demand will be sustained due to population growth and rising standards of living. Royal Dutch Shell recently released its 2021 outlook for LNG, projecting global demand for LNG will nearly double by 2040 to about 700 million tons annually. Asia is expected to drive nearly 75% of this demand growth as LNG increasingly becomes a substitute for higher emitting energy sources, especially coal. According to the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook released in October 2020, global consumption of natural gas is expected to increase by 30% by 2040. A sizable portion of that demand is expected to occur in China, India, South Korea, and Japan. Let me offer a slightly different angle to this. Last year, the Port of Metro Vancouver saw 3 million metric tons of household goods manufactured in China come through the port. With 80% of China's electricity supply coming from coal-fired generation, don't we have an obligation to supply them much less carbon-intensive energy inputs for the very goods we are asking them to produce for us? If there were a row of factories located in BC producing 3 million metric tons of product annually, supplied by 80% coal, it would be a national priority to change. We can change that by exporting Canadian LNG to Asia. Currently, almost all of Canada's natural gas international exports go to the United States, but LNG development on the West Coast is set to change that situation. BC's LNG presents a long list of advantages. A tremendous resource. The Canadian Energy Regulator estimates total marketable reserves in BC, primarily in the Montney Formation, to be 39.2 trillion cubic feet. Low life cycle emissions with electrification of upstream production facilities powered by hydroelectricity where practical. BC's LNG can be amongst the lowest emissions intensive in the world. Indigenous benefits. Indigenous communities in BC stand to realize substantial economic and social benefits from upstream production, pipeline construction, and operation. Marine transport, shorter shipping routes and times to Asian markets. Experience. BC has a highly skilled workforce in the exploration, extraction, processing, transportation infrastructure, construction, and service sectors. Technology, innovation, and collaboration. Home to an industry driving groundbreaking technologies to reduce emissions. With robust forecasts for growth in natural gas demand, environmental leadership holds tremendous potential for BC to realize a competitive advantage that will grow over time in an increasingly climate-conscious world. The upstream natural gas sector shares Canadians' desire for a sustainable energy future. Producers continue to lower their carbon emissions intensity, and with strong environmental standards and a focus on continuous improvement, responsibly produced Canadian natural gas is already part of a green recovery. Here's another interesting indicator. Drilling activity from May 2020 to August 2020 was below the 3-year average as companies responded to the cash flow challenges and COVID uncertainty. But in the fall of 2020, we started to see the industry get on its feet and respond to the better than average natural gas prices. Drilling activity picked up dramatically. From November 2020 through March 2021, activity was well above the 3-year average. And I know those service sector companies and the people around Fort St. John feel that recovery. I'd now like to turn things over to my colleague, Kelly McTaggart with CAP. Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me well here. Very happy to be here today. Thanks, Brad. And thanks again to Cheryl and the entire Fort St. John Chamber of Commerce community. After living in Fort St. John for many years, I know that it's a community that packs a punch, and this event is nothing short of that as well. So as Brad mentioned, I represent, Western Canadian engagement across the Western provinces, and I'm very excited to facilitate this discussion today. Once again, I'd like to acknowledge that although we're doing this virtually, we're doing so with the traditional territory of the Denishaw people in mind. And I would also like to point out that National Indigenous Peoples Day is also coming up on June 21st. And I encourage everyone online today to look for ways to make an impact in your respective communities. British Columbia's oil and natural gas sector has an opportunity to lead in economic recovery in a post-pandemic world. And we've heard that throughout the discussions today, but I really want to hone in on that in this panel's discussions. And we also have an opportunity to be a world-class leader in climate stewardship and innovation. This discussion is intended to focus on the benefits of LNG in BC and Northern BC in particular. The economic impacts, job opportunities, and priorities for the environment and healthy communities are all paramount to a sustainable resource sector. We're joined now by our government and industry leaders to discuss how Northeastern BC can be seen and heard in Victoria and the importance of this relationship for LNG growth in the province. So a couple of housekeeping notes. We do encourage you to participate by asking questions. You can do so in the top right corner of your screen, and we'll hopefully try and get to those before the end of this short panel, short but impactful. And my last point is that we are aware that Minister Ralston needs to leave about 5 minutes early, so we'll try and accommodate those questions at the front end of this hour. So very quickly, I'd like to just go over who's on this panel today and do some introductions. So starting with Susannah Pierce, who we just heard from prior to this. She is the country chair of Canada and GM Renewables and Energy Solutions Canada. She has held senior positions in the energy and tech sectors in Canada, the United States, and Europe, most recently as Director of Corporate Affairs for LNG Canada. And she joined LNG Canada in 2013, and under her leadership, the project achieved its federal and provincial environmental approvals and received unprecedented support from First Nations, communities, and governments. And this support has underpinned LNG's final investment decision, which took place in 2018, making it the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. So welcome, Susannah. Secondly, I'd like to welcome Minister Bruce Ralston, the Minister of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources with the Government of British Columbia. Minister Ralston was first elected MLA for Surrey-Whalley in 2005 and brings understanding of trade and tech to the key priorities of the ministry, which includes supporting the implementation of Clean BC, the government's plan for climate action, and innovation in the clean tech sector. Thirdly, I'd like to welcome Minister Ravi Khalon, the Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. He was elected as the MLA for Delta North in 2017 and re-elected in 2020. And he is the Minister, as I mentioned, of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, previously serving as the Parliamentary Secretary for Sport and Multiculturalism. I would also like to mention a fun fact that he is a two-time Olympian in field hockey for Team Canada and has been inducted into the Delta Sports Hall of Fame. And lastly, and rounding out this panel really nicely, is David Yeager, the owner of Yeager Management. He's an oil service executive, energy policy analyst, and oil and gas writer and author. He currently has a contract assignment as president and CEO of Winterhawk Well Abandonment Limited, which is commercializing multiple new technologies to reduce the cost and increase the effectiveness of contaminated soil reclamation and wellborne methane emissions. He's one of Canada's most experienced and respected analysts and commentator on energy policy and the oil and gas industry. So welcome to all of you. I think we should just jump right into it. And I really do want this to be, conversation based. So please jump in at any moment if you want to add anything. But I think we'll start this off in, broad terms. So we'll start with Minister Ralston. I would be really interested to hear what role do you think the industry has to play in economic recovery in the province, generally speaking?
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. Let me begin by acknowledging that here in Victoria in the legislative buildings, I'm speaking to you from the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. Great to be here virtually, along with my colleague, Minister Khalon, to discuss the future of LNG here in British Columbia. As we transition into our post-COVID recovery, and we just announced stage 2, so we're chugging along in the recovery track. Our government is working to ensure that everyone in the province will continue to benefit from the economic opportunities presented by the LNG industry by working closely with local communities and Indigenous nations. Our government ensured work across the oil and gas sector, including working on the LNG Canada facility and the Coastal GasLink pipeline, could continue through the pandemic because we knew what it meant for the workers, their families, local businesses, and the economy. We will continue to support natural gas projects that meet our 4 conditions for development. Let me list them. Number 1, proposals must include express guarantees of jobs and training opportunities for British Columbians. 2, proposals must provide a fair return for our resource. 3, proposals must respect and make partners of First Nations. And 4, proposals must protect our air, land, and water, including living up to our climate commitments. These 4 conditions ensure that resource development projects provide stable, good-paying jobs for British Columbians in the north, especially in rural and remote communities. Working in partnership with industry, British Columbia has become a world leader in responsible resource development. Our government continues to support responsible resource development while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We have partnered with the Government of Canada to provide new Clean BC industrial electrification rates, which offer a discount on BC Hydro's standard industrial rates to eligible existing customers that install new equipment that uses electricity instead of fossil fuels. In addition, we have directed $84 million from the federal government to create a Clean BC Facilities Electrification Fund that provides support to customers to reduce the cost of connecting to our clean electricity grid. Fast-tracking electrification across the economy will keep the resource development industry competitive, incentivize innovative solutions, and support our economic recovery, while at the same time creating jobs for British Columbians and attracting new investment to our province. We're also supporting the restoration of our environment when projects are at the end of their life cycles. Through the province's dormant, orphan, and legacy wells cleanup, we are directing $120 million in federal funding to support BC-based natural gas sector service contractors. This program is supporting nearly 1,000 jobs for BC workers and gas service companies and reducing environmental impacts in the Northeast. This is a benefit for both our economy and our environment. When we support the industry supports our communities. At 40 billion, LNG Canada is the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. LNG Canada has already awarded more than $3 billion on project-related contracts to BC-based contractors, including approximately $2.5 billion to indigenously owned businesses. Coastal GasLink has awarded over $1 billion to Indigenous and local businesses along the pipeline route. Collectively, LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink will create up to 10,000 jobs during construction, and many of those jobs are in existence right now. At the end of December 2020, more than 3,000 workers were employed at the project site in Kitimat, most of whom were British Columbians. After completion, LNG Canada will create 350 to 450 jobs in operations. Both LNG Canada and CGL have plans in place to ensure their development does not burden small communities. To date, LNG Canada, to their credit, have spent more than $6 million on social investments and workforce development programs. The province, as well, has also initiated the Northern Healthy Communities Fund, providing grant funding to local communities, Indigenous nations, and not-for-profits for incremental staffing, education, outreach, public engagement, and project development. The next intake deadline, just for those who are interested in this program, is August 13th, 2021. The ongoing collaboration of everyone connected to the sector, local contractors and businesses, chambers of commerce, Indigenous nations, municipalities, and industry representatives is crucial. Your combined hard work has secured BC's position as a global leader in LNG and continues to be the driving force in realizing its economic benefits for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Ralston. There's certainly a lot going on and many resources being allocated, to the growth of the sector. Minister Khalon, do you have anything to add to this, either specific to LNG and job growth, or specific to the upstream industry, generally speaking?
Thank you again, Kelly, and thank you to Cheryl for the invite. I really appreciate the opportunity to see other faces besides just seeing Minister Ralston and my colleagues. So it's a pleasure to see all of you. I think just some opening comments, Kelly. I'll just share that I too am speaking from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation, and I just want to first say to everyone, I hope everyone is safe and well. It's been a very challenging 15 months for all of us, and certainly we're seeing brighter days ahead, and so just wanted to wish everyone well and ensure that everyone is safe. I think just to touch on the economy broadly speaking, we've been fortunate here in British Columbia. Minister Ralston's touched on the fact that we've been able to keep much of our industry relatively open, and it's a testament to the Premier's leadership, who came to the task of provincial health measures with the lens of how do we keep things open, not how do we keep things closed, how do we keep people working and keep the industry going in a safe way, and it's a testament to all the companies who've been doing phenomenal work to keep everyone safe. It's been very challenging, not easy, but I think there's a lot to be proud of in those efforts. And certainly when we look at the economy, the last labor force data that came out in the middle of the third wave showed that we are at 99% at pre-pandemic employment numbers. That is significant numbers if you consider that that was in the middle of the third wave. And in fact, as we start opening up, we're starting to hear that there are challenges in some sectors to find workers. Of course, some sectors, the ones we're talking about today, pay a lot better and are hiring people, and that's really positive for many families across the province. There's three key pillars that are going to guide, Kelly, our work when it comes to economic recovery. Innovation, the economic recovery will be led by innovation. We need to ensure that it's sustainable and that it's inclusive. And so innovation will be critical. If you look at the pace of change that we've seen in the last 15 months, it's been remarkable. And the pace is not about to slow down. Everything from how we communicate like we are today, to how our kids are going through school, to how court systems are being accessed, to how food is being produced. Everything is going to be going at this pace of change. And so we need to be ahead of the curve. And I think in order to keep our companies at the competitive edge in a global market, we need to find ways to continue to find ways to innovate and become even more sustainable. And we produce some of the cleanest products in the world. And certainly I've been joining Minister Ralston in many conversations with ambassadors from all over the world where we brag about that. But that is going to be a greater part of our story in the economic recovery. And I look forward to working with many of the folks on the call and those who are listening on how we can tell that story best.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. I think this is a good segue, actually. I think, in terms of innovation and where we're going as an industry, especially in BC, with BC low carbon advantage and some of the other big initiatives that have been rolling the last year or more. I think I'm going to pass it over actually to, let's go to Susannah. I'd love to get your thoughts on what is Shell and LNG Canada doing to support innovation? And then maybe more specifically, what are you doing in local Indigenous communities to support economic development, training and development? I know you spoke a bit about this in your last discussion, but any specific examples would be great.
Sure, thanks Kelly. And Minister, it's great to see you and David. And I am calling from Lower Mainland in Vancouver, traditional territory, the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And as I mentioned earlier today, it is something that I think we have to all do with great recognition of our past and also how we can build a future together with our Indigenous communities. And indeed, as we think about the LNG Canada project, I feel honored to have worked on that project for a period of time in which we really tried to make sure that we had a different type of relationship with the Indigenous communities in which we would seek to permit, build, and operate the facility. And as most folks I think know, the plant is located on the traditional territory of the Haisla First Nation. We have a very good working relationship with the Haisla, which means that we have a relationship that's not always going to be easy. We're not always going to find we're 100% aligned, but we have the relationships in which we can work through the differences to achieve an outcome that we think is the right outcome for everyone. So again, as it relates to our project in LNG Canada, the innovation, if we go back in time, really started with how we decided to actually generate the energy or the power to create the liquefied natural gas. And we used 20% renewable power from BC Hydro, combined with a very efficient gas turbine from GE, now Baker Hughes, that then enabled us to have the lowest amount of carbon emitted per ton of LNG. Now that was the initial innovation that we took, and that innovation in itself really created a project that has the lowest amount of carbon per tons of LNG produced anywhere in the world today by any large facility. But we know the goalposts don't stay still. We know that as it relates to environmental performance and social performance, and in particular the climate, the goalposts will continue to move. So we need to continue to think about, well, how do we look at our overall footprint and how do we continue to innovate? And innovation will extend all the way across the value chain. So that's going to include right up here in this area, in Fort St. John. And as I mentioned in my remarks earlier today, Shell has taken a view that we need to look at how we produce natural gas and do as much as we can to lower emissions there, as well as how we look at the plant. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, we invested in Generation 4 plant technology, which will essentially remove methane emissions. So using electric valves. We've taken a look at how we can improve performance when we start up wells. And so there's a number of things we've done, at the gas production site, and we'll continue to look to do as we look to other opportunities to electrify. As it relates to partnership with communities and delivering local benefits, Minister Ralston mentioned the approximately $3 billion that we have already dedicated towards local and Indigenous businesses. I believe that's unprecedented. And Coastal GasLink has also similarly made those commitments. Along with those commitments is a recognition that we need to see companies partner with Indigenous communities so that they can develop the capacity and the experience to be successful enterprises for the long run. And so really taking the opportunity to identify and work with Indigenous communities, create the joint ventures, enables us to have the right contractors to go to then do the work on site, but then also prepare them for the next jobs that are to come. So that requires that we work with businesses, but that the businesses also work with Indigenous nations and invest in training. So it's not only LNG Canada making the investments in training, and I can speak to some of that, whether it's with the Building Construction Association, whether or not it's with Your Place to create apprenticeship opportunities for women, but it's actually all the other businesses that partner with Indigenous communities and the training that they also work with those communities to deliver. And so I can talk about Ledcor. We can talk about some of the other businesses, RAM, for example. There's lots of other businesses that have partnered with Indigenous communities in order to generate opportunities. So again, I think as I think about LNG Canada's experience, as I think about how we're looking towards what other things do we need to look across the entire supply chain to improve our environmental performance, as I look to how do we continue to share benefits, it kind of all comes down to how do we continue to work, with communities, with Indigenous nations, and also governments. Because the other thing this government has been quite good about doing is helping to identify opportunities where we might be able to work together to create future opportunities. And so some of those things that the ministers mentioned included how can we look at new sorts of tax treatments so that we can invest in lower carbon technologies. How do we take a look at different policies and regulations that might also create, I think, the certainty so that when we actually invest in some of these technologies and fuels, that there will be a market for them. So really, it's all of us working together to achieve, I think, the outcome that I think we collectively agree is the right outcome.
That's great, Susannah. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts of LNG Canada too is that the project's been able to kind of utilize the existing supply chain within BC and the skilled workforce, much of which is actually in northeastern BC. So that's great. I think, well, let's move it over. I'm gonna give another question to Minister Ralston here. I just wanted to know, we know that innovation has a huge role to play in recovery, but specifically, what is your government doing to support industry in meeting BC's low carbon goals?
Well, thanks very much. And as Susannah Pierce has said, innovation is a moving frontier. Simply because you've achieved a level of innovation now does not mean that you can rest. And I was particularly encouraged by the comment about removing methane entirely from the production process. I think everyone recognizes that is a problem that vexes the industry, a deleterious substance that escapes into the atmosphere, and many people are, through various processes, trying to eliminate methane as a byproduct of the natural gas production. So I think that's an example of where Shell Canada and Shell internationally has led in this sector. But speaking of innovation, I mean, an innovation is an improvement to a product, a process, or a service by adding value or increasing efficiency or adding new ideas. So it's a very broad term, and it really applies to most of human activity. There's always room for innovation, but in the sector, we are, for example, we'll be initiating our hydrogen study, hydrogen strategy, coming out fairly shortly. That has implications for hydrogen development, which will assist us in transitioning to a low carbon future, and also has implications for the natural gas sector. The Minister Heyman, who's the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, through his ministry, we've initiated programs where essentially the carbon tax over $30 a ton, by innovating, in other words, making changes to production processes, companies can earn that carbon tax back. And in addition, some of the money that's paid in carbon tax, we, for worthy projects, we invest directly in innovative projects in the sector. The other thing maybe that I could mention is, and this has been around for quite a while, but it is still a leading program, is the low carbon fuel standard. It's one of the most effective tools the province has for reducing emissions. It offers credits to fuel suppliers that reduce the carbon intensity of their products. So it's mirrored in jurisdictions like California and Oregon, but it's British Columbia was and continues to be a leader in that sector. So there are many paths to innovation, but certainly that's the future, and certainly some of the climate goals that have been set will absolutely require innovation by all players to reach those targets.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. David, I'm going to pass it over to you, and I think let's switch gears and kind of take it into the competitiveness discussion. Again, starting broadly, how do we keep Canada's oil and gas sector competitive?
Well, first of all, we're very competitive. I think if you look at British Columbia, when people think about BC,
hopefully
the
David's
largest.
Still there. We may have lost him. My
mic's on.
He's good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
I'm coming in. I can hear myself perfectly. That's a joke. One of the largest industrial or commercial segment of BC, for which it probably is not well understood, is natural gas production. It's a 70-year story since the original discovery at Fort St. John in 1951. And moving gas from where it is to where it's needed is also an old story, because the West Coast Transmission Pipeline came through and arrived in Vancouver in 1957. And this was a case where we had clean gas in one place, and we moved it a long distance and moved mountains literally because of BC's geography to get it to where it was needed. And I got this wonderful quote from a book about Pacific Petroleums called Wildcatters, written by Earl Grey in 1982. And at that time, Premier Bennett said, "This is the greatest event in British Columbia since the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway," with the second only to that. And then another little tidbit, because at that time, and this goes back to Brad's wonderful introduction about innovation, it's really a point in time thing. But he talked about how it would be great if we could move gas to where it's needed, like we did in the Lower Mainland. And here's a quote from the Vancouver Sun in 1960. And when they didn't have gas, "Those who have never tried to heat their home with wet cedar sawdust may have mercifully forgotten this soul-searching experience." And that was when the gas showed up and they all switched to natural gas furnaces. So when it comes to the expertise and innovation, from where I sit as second-generation oil patch, it's been 70 years in British Columbia of continuous innovation from the original discoveries of natural gas in the Northeast. And so the trade term is domain expertise. So when it comes to the domain expertise of moving gas and taking on large infrastructure projects like this, this is something we're good at and something British Columbians should be a lot more proud of than they are. To go back to the competitiveness, there's two things that BC has that are generally overlooked. One is the lousy weather in Kitimat. This is not intuitive that the temperature would be an advantage. But if you have to look at the energy requirements to liquefy natural gas and you're competing with Qatar or Australia, we have finally found something useful for the weather in Northeast BC. The other is geography, simply the closest source of LNG, where it's being created to where it's needed. So we have the geology, we've got the technology, we have the know-how, we have the experience. All we need is the support and the political will. And so we're there. There's tremendous advantages in every way, shape, manner, or form. We've got the reserves. I'm running out of adjectives to show what a great opportunity this is. Fortunately, everyone on this call recognizes this. There's just certain elements of this in terms of history that really should get more attention than they have.
And, David, I'm just going to jump in here. I think we might have just lost Kelly, but, maybe let me just add on to what you just said, because I think, it reminded me that, as we think about natural gas, value chain, you're also seeing LNG obviously used for transport. You're seeing it in shipping increasingly. You're seeing it also, how we can take a look at LNG fueled tugs within the LNG Canada project. We're using the first hybrid electric tug plus an LNG fueled truck, and that also helps to reduce emissions. So, as it relates to natural gas, there's a full value chain there, which can continue to be used to decarbonize the harder to abate sectors, to get their emissions lower, while we look at transforming some of the other sectors, which are less hard to abate, into other sources of energy, which are lower emissions. And it's kind of similar to what we're trying to do at Shell, because one of the interesting things that I'll take a moment to say here too is that, you know, we see the transition that Canada's going through, and to some extent that BC's going through, very similar to our own. You know, we've committed to net zero. We've continued to look at how we can decarbonize our entire portfolio from scope 1 to 3. And that requires that we take a look at what is the right process of doing it. And as I said earlier in my remarks, one of the things that we can do is take a look at the existing assets we have today to generate the revenues that then can be funded into the newer technologies to decarbonize further the industry and the economy. And so we can have this just transition that doesn't abandon existing assets, but essentially uses them to the extent possible to fund the transition. And we see a lot of that potential, you know, in our own business, again, as we look to increasingly decarbonizing across scope 1 to 3 and investing in new technology, some of which, Minister, will be hydrogen, some of which will be inspired by the low carbon fuel standard. And along with that, you know, Minister Kahlan, going into how do we make sure that people in Fort St. John and across the entire sector have opportunity to participate in some of those new jobs, because that's also really crucial. And one of the things that I'm very mindful of is how we continue to make sure in that just transition that people who have depended upon these jobs today, and David, over the 70-year history, can look to new jobs into the future in some of these industries, because some of them are going to be similar, but also running, you know, a solar facility is much different than running a gas plant. You know, the number of jobs, running a wind farm is much different than running a gas plant. So we need to be thoughtful about that transition for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities as well.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there as well, Susannah, and I appreciate your comments. And I have to say, David, when you started with 70 years ago, I was thinking about my grandfather when he started there, but his stories were much longer than yours. So well done for making.
The clock's ticking here, Ravi.
Well, I appreciate that. No, I really appreciate Susannah's comments about you know, ensuring that there's some form of just transition. You know, one of the things that we've seen in the economic recovery, you know, when they say the tide comes in, you end up seeing really what's the inequalities or the disparities in our society. And what we've seen in the pandemic was disproportionate impact on women, disproportionate impact on Indigenous communities and new immigrants. And so when we think about an economic recovery, we have to keep that in mind and keep it front and center. And so what does an economic recovery look like? Of course, there are things we can do to have the representations on our boards and panels and discussions, because I think that voice is critically important. But beyond that, you know, skills, trades and training is going to be critical. It's going to be vitally important, and especially where we talk about innovation and where every sector is moving to. We need to ensure that we're providing those opportunities up front, so that people are not, again, left behind in whatever transitions that happen. And so I know that there's a whole host of programs, trades training programs that are available. The Canada-BC Workforce Development Agreement provides opportunities for workers, employers, communities to come together to create opportunities, pre-apprenticeship opportunities for Indigenous communities, women, other equity-seeking groups. So I think this is going to be a critical piece, not only for us all, and I'm talking every sector, to create space for people to be at the table. Susannah mentioned about how the importance of that relationship was for LNG Canada as a foundation for them to succeed. But we need to look at every sector and create those tables and create training opportunities for people to have meaningful opportunities in whatever the economic recovery looks like.
Just two comments. Just first of all, on Susannah's point.
Hi everyone, I'm back now. Sorry about that. There's never a dull moment when it comes to technology. I think I caught the tail end of that, and just you were discussing some training. I'm not exactly sure what I missed in the conversation, but I think, you know, what I really wanted to hear from everybody as we kind of finish this conversation and move on to Q&A from the audience, which this is a good plug. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat now. But it would be really great to hear from everybody you know, in your opinion, what are the biggest opportunities for industry to meet BC's climate goals while also leading an economic recovery? And I think, you know, maybe we'll start with, if David's still on the line here, I was going to start with him.
You bet.
So go for it, David.
Well, just in the short term, again, and the Minister Ralston mentioned about methane. The first thing we can do, and they're doing this already, the one thing about the oil service industry is they're innovative and they're chameleons and dynamic. So the first thing we can look at is LNG powered drilling rigs, which already exist, LNG powered frac spreads, which already exist. Going back to the methane emissions, we can test our wells into the flow line instead of the atmosphere. So the really low-hanging fruit on the upstream side, and just to point out, there's something like, just in the study I did for Petroleum Services Association, just keeping your facility supplied with gas, Susannah, the numbers we came up with is at 1.7 to 2 BCF a day of exports, is something in the range of 3,600 to 4,200 direct jobs a year on the field, in the ground, in Northeast Alberta, supplying gas just to your facility, and that will go up. On the subject of the energy transition, which is nice to see mentioned, the one thing I would ask for those who aren't energy nerds like I am and most of the people on this call, is that one thing about natural gas that renewables aren't is it's exportable. It is a powerful fuel that can be shipped long distances. Going back to my 70-year history, we tied the West Coast line right down to California. LNG, we're moving it a long distance. And electricity, unfortunately, most of the people that need it already have it. So this transition that you talked about, Mr. Khalon, very thoughtfully, and that's all great. But I think people have to understand, when you say we want to go from here in this business to renewables, I would like everybody to think through how great the export aspects of this particular type of energy is. It's got a whole bunch of other challenges with it elsewhere, but we can't not export renewable electricity in a meaningful way from BC. So that retraining program is going to have to be a lot more comprehensive than people appreciate. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, David. For some reason, your sound isn't coming through properly for me when everybody else is. So I'm going to pass it over to Susannah to go next, and hopefully she can give some follow-up to that and some thoughts.
Sure. Well, I think David's raised some really good points. I think there is a value chain still in natural gas that should be used to the extent possible. It is exportable. And we know that the countries that are actually importing the gas increasingly, as I said in my remarks earlier, are looking for indications that we're doing everything we can to have a decarbonized product, because that is a differentiator. And if we look at what Cheniere just announced last week, that they're going to actually start to tag where their gas comes from so they can have the GHG estimates. If we look at the role of technology, of being able to footprint, the gas footprint, the GHG footprint of natural gas, we have the opportunity. We are predisposed for the opportunity to export low carbon natural gas from British Columbia, and LNG Canada will be one of the largest, exporters of that very soon. But the other part of the value chain of natural gas, which the minister referenced, is certainly hydrogen or ammonia. And so there's still opportunities within the gas value chain itself to see opportunities for growth. But we also have to recognize we need to be consistent with the things that Minister Ralston said, which are those 4 key criteria for development. And, again, I think the challenge in front of us is to allow for the right levels of support for the innovation that allows us to continue to have the jobs in the sector, but have the jobs in the sector that it can also provide decarbonized product that, again, consumers are increasingly asking for. Because the thing that doesn't always get accounted for when we talk about getting to net zero is the capital stock turnover to get there. And what I mean by that is, if you have an existing gas plant, you're not going to turn that over to renewables tomorrow. You're going to want to continue to use the gas plants. You're going to want to look along the value chain to how you can actually lower the carbon footprint of that. So that is the piece of the discussion that needs to be considered as we look to what is the best way to achieve net zero. So again, on the innovation side of things, it really, as I said earlier, probably not as distinctly as I should have, it is the combination and the shared vision of companies, of communities, of Indigenous communities, and government, and other non-governmental actors saying, we've got a goal. And this is it. Now, we have different pathways of getting there, but how do we balance all the various different considerations that we need to balance to get there so that we are finding a way of having a transition that can protect people's jobs, that can generate government revenues for all the things that we enjoy so much in this great province, that we can create a differentiated consumer product that people will buy, and we create that future again, which we can, that is consistent with our climate as well as other goals. So I think we can do it. And I think that, you know, as it relates to LNG, I think we've shown it can be done. And I think like anything that's challenging, we have to come together to find the solutions to get there.
Yeah, most definitely, Susannah. Thanks for that. It's the blue bridge to a green future, as I like to say. Is Minister Ralston still on the line here? It's you know, at the back end we're having some tech issues.
I'm here.
Please,
I'm here.
Perfect. Okay, sorry everyone. It's we're kind of, yeah, we're putting this all together. It's the puzzle piece of technology. But Minister Ralston, why don't you go ahead, because I know you have to jump off in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, just to follow on what Susannah Pierce has said, I mean, providing we stick with our 4 principles, British Columbia, and I say I'm also responsible for the mining sector, very similar opportunities to brand British Columbia as the low carbon supplier of choice globally. And what I think what LNG Canada has done in the branding that they have created, and its branding is it's a bit of an esoteric, it's almost like a religious experience, but to communicate that globally is challenging. But I think British Columbia is getting there. We have the opportunity through the things that we are doing here in British Columbia, the technological innovation that we've made and continue to make, our relations with Indigenous people, our low carbon economy generally, our opportunity to have a just transition. We really are a long way towards being a supplier of choice in a very turbulent world where people are looking for stability, for reliability, and for low carbon products and services. British Columbia has a lot to recommend it, and that's what motivates our government, motivates Minister Khalon, I know, as we go forward. Hydrogen's been mentioned, there's carbon capture and sequestration. We've talked a little bit about the low carbon fuel standard. All of these innovation increments add up to a real opportunity for British Columbia, the economy, and for the people of British Columbia, and ultimately for the people of Canada.
Thank you, Minister Ralston. And last but not least, maybe Minister Khalon, I'll pass it over to you for any final thoughts on this. So again, just so everybody's aware, in a few words, what are the biggest opportunities for industry to meet BC's climate goals while also leading in economic recovery?
Yeah, it's a little unfair after you have 3 intelligent people give the answers and then you stick me at the end. But what I just want to echo what Minister Ralston just said, and in fact, all your panelists have highlighted. I mean, and your panel is called the BC Advantage. We do have a BC Advantage, and it's going to be an important story, as I said in the opening of my remarks. It's going to be an important story for us to tell. We are, you know, we have a world-class clean tech sector. We are a low carbon producer of natural resources. Our energy grid is clean. You know, there's so many things to talk about. In fact, my first conversation with the U.S. ambassador when we were talking about the new direction from the U.S. government, and I said, yeah, we want to help you. We want to help you get your goals because of the clean products that we produce here. And not only that, I think Susannah mentioned also our supply chains as well are green. And so we have a huge advantage. Certainly some work that Minister Ralston and I are going to be focused on going forward is how do we tell that story all over the world. And but we have to meet our targets. I think there's an understanding, but how we get there, we're going to have to work together, and it's going to require all of us committing to the mission and having discussions, sometimes tough discussions about how it is we can get there together. And I feel like we're all ready to get there.
Great, thanks so much. I think I'm gonna stay with you here and just pass it over to kind of the Q&A chat that we've gotten. And there's a question here from Mindy that I think you'd probably be the best person to answer this question. So I'm just going to read this. So Mindy, she says, I fully believe Indigenous communities will continue to pursue equity ownership opportunities versus JVs or joint ventures, and this will not only strengthen and continue to build capacity in their communities, it will elevate Canada and BC's attractiveness to attract investment. So sorry, this just in our economy. What can government and industry do to remove barriers for Indigenous communities / nations to develop those equity partnerships?
Maybe I'll just.
Sure, who you're asking. I wasn't sure who you were asking.
Oh,
Susannah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Susannah, go ahead. We'll start with you.
Oh dear, who's ever got the mic first? I'll be quick. Thank you, Mindy, for the question. You know, I do agree that I think equity investment is a great opportunity for nations, and I think what you have to do is come and work with willing parties that are willing to share the equity, find the opportunities, because it is a way of bringing communities in a manner which actually gives them a new level of experience, which I think allows them then to go, you know, to different places again, as far as participation in the economy and equity ownership and reconciliation. So I think it's great. I think, again, companies need to come to the table and have those discussions. I think governments, and I'll pass over to Mr. Khalon, I think can come and help with supporting those equity investments, because it's an equity investment. You know, it requires funding, and it requires a certain level of participation when things are good and when things are bad, because there's also risk involved in investment. So again, it's having an open conversation about the risks and the opportunities, and then being able to find the resourcing to support those types of joint ventures and equity investments.
Yeah, thanks for that, and I appreciate the comment from I didn't hear the name of the person, but I appreciate the comment raised. I think there's if we look across the province, we've seen so many opportunities to rethink how we've done things. You know, it's one of the things that the pandemic has really done, I think, for people is to say, you know, both to check our own lives to see if this is what we want to be doing and all those things that come with, you know, a pandemic, but also looking at all our processes, looking at how we've been rolling as a government, as industry, and say, is this the best way? Is there better ways? And certainly our partners in First Nations communities have come with interesting proposals. You know, we've launched we're launching very soon in BC, which is a strategic investment fund of $500 million, and we will be taking equity stakes as a province in companies that help us address the three pillars that I've addressed, help drive innovation to ensure that we become more of a sustainable province, but it also needs to be inclusive and distributed throughout the province. So that'll be an opportunity for us to look to partner or provide equity and Indigenous-led initiatives. But there's going to be a whole host of other initiatives, I think, going forward. And Minister Ralston was just talking about that this morning, and it's a shame that he had to log off, because he, I'm sure, would have loved to share more thoughts on that. But yeah, we need to find new ways, partnerships with First Nations, and Susannah mentioned in her comments as well.
Just
That's
before
great.
we go,
well, since we still have you, Minister Khalon, I'm going to ask one more question about the workforce.
I think
Or Kelly, you do?
David?
David just wanted to jump in.
Sorry,
Well,
David, go ahead.
Well, I would just like to point out along the theme is on the service and supply sector, because it's regional and because it's small, the opportunities starting at a very low entry level, at the level that you're at and growing with the business, the opportunities for equity participation in the support sector. And it starts as simple as catering and trucking, local hotels, communities, for gosh sakes, the local gas station. The opportunity to embed yourself in the ongoing service and supply sector that's going to support this project, once it's up and running, are phenomenal. And they're easy, and it's you don't have to buy the pipeline. You don't have to own the plant to have significant. And Susannah talked to this early in her introduction of the service and supply contractors that are doing JVs, doing equity participation interests. I did a study on this for MNP, a presentation to a previous government in 2013 about the different layers at which First Nations in BC could participate in LNG. They're not going to open a pipe mill. They're not going to build gas compressors. But boy, on the ground in Fort St. John and all the communities along the way, all the way for the Kitimat, the opportunities are phenomenal. people, and maybe sometimes everybody likes to think big. Maybe think smaller. Power in numbers. Thank you.
And Kelly, I have to jump in there and say I really appreciated the invite today. This dynamic panel that you have. I look forward to coming back. I'm not sure if Mayor Ackerman is watching, but hi, Mayor Ackerman, if she is. And thank you, Cheryl, for the invite. Unfortunately, I have to run into the legislature to do a quick little speech, but I really thank you all for the invite and hope everyone is safe and well, and we can do this in person very soon.
Most definitely. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. And this concludes our panel. Actually, it is the end of the hour, so we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for joining, and to all our panelists who were able to join today, and to Susannah. This is she's given lots of time today to the conference, so thanks again. And we will pass it over to Cheryl.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And I also want to, echo the thank yous to everybody. To be able to get two ministers on a panel for an hour and get their attention is pretty extraordinary. So I feel very privileged that they took the time to join us. Along with you, David, and you, Susannah, I could listen to this conversation for another hour pretty easily. I think that it probably has a lot of information that we all want to hear. So I do want to thank everybody for joining us. I always, I want to thank our speakers, our moderators, our panelists, and our attendees who all took time for that. And to thank everybody who has taken some time, I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be making a donation to honor the 215 lives that have been lost at the residential school tragedy. We want to make sure that we're recognizing that and honoring that as well. So we will be making a donation from the conference towards that. Tomorrow, and it sort of reflects on some of the conversation today, there will be a session on communications between Indigenous and business and industry and the government, and how do we build those partnerships and relationships through communication. And we've got some great people who are going to be talking about partnerships that they were able to build, and some really fundamental information on how you start and where you go with building that relationship between different businesses and such. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to our speakers. We appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks.